Welcome to Unsheltered Conversations, a podcast from HomeAid America. I'm Scott Larson, your host. And today I'm joined by two guests whose work and lives embody what it means to move from indifference to connection. Kevin F. Adler is the founder of Miracle Messages and author of When We Walk By, a powerful book about the crisis of homelessness and the deeper crisis of belonging. Alongside him with us is Jamie Marie Davis, a Miracle Messages Advisory Council member who brings lived experience and an incredible wisdom to the work of rehumanizing our neighbors. And together, we're going to talk about just personal narratives, the power of reconnection, and how we all play a role in building a more compassionate world. Kevin, as we step into this conversation, I first became aware of you and your work when I listened to a podcast, or it actually was an interview of you at South by Southwest with Amber Fogarty of Stand Together Foundation. And HomeAid has a rich history with not Stand Together per se, but with the prior organization that Amber was with, and with Community First Village in Austin, Texas. And just a great community where HomeAid has been able to build tiny homes and just elevate the built environment for people that have been on the streets for well over a decade. And it was a privilege to get to know Amber in her work there. And then when I heard her interview you at South by Southwest, I thought, I need to get to know Kevin. And last fall, we had you speak to all of our national staff in a great dialogue in one of our all-staff meetings. And I've passed your book around, and I've really let a lot of people know about the work of Miracle Messages. And I'm really excited that with this podcast now, we can even talk further and more in depth about the work that you do. So as we dive into some of the conversations with both of you, what inspired you to write When We Walk By? And can you share the moment or the story that really first moved you towards your work?
Absolutely. Well, first, Scott, congrats on your new podcast. How exciting. And it's great to be with you again. You know, really what it comes down to with When We Walk By was this desire to share stories, insights, experiences that had been so generously shared with me over the last decade of doing work in this space that changed my heart and my mind on this issue of homelessness. I felt like at Miracle Messages, the nonprofit that I started and led for about 10 years that helps people who are experiencing homelessness, reunite with their loved ones. We have met so many extraordinary people like Jamie, whose story I'm really excited to have here today and have her share a bit of her wisdom. And meeting people like Jamie and Ray and Elizabeth and Gabe and Lainey and just, countless others, that transformed how I see the issue of homelessness. And so we've done a lot of, social media posts, and news coverage has, been pretty good to us. But I had never, I thought, gosh, these kind of come and go. There's a kind of fleetingness to the medium. And so really wanted to just start out by taking time to capture and collect those stories that have changed my perspective on the issue, with the thought that perhaps that would have a similar effect on others. And so, the inspiration, my co-author, Don Burns, is a national thought leader on the issue of homelessness. He's now in his early 80s, still as productive and active as ever. But when he agreed to jump in with me and bring a little bit more of the policy analysis, some of the understanding of the history of homelessness in this country, I thought that could be a really wonderful project to work on. And maybe the final piece that really led it from just saying a collection of stories and excited to work with a co-author to we have something really critical that needs to be shared with the world. So the initial starting point for the book was really looking at homelessness as akin to a type of unnatural disaster. When we think of disasters, we think of floods and earthquakes and fires and hurricanes. And in those instances, there's this short but pronounced period of coming together and empathy, and showing solidarity with people who have gone through this horrific event. And the more I researched and spent time around homelessness, the more I realized this issue is much closer to a flood, earthquake, a fire. It's just we don't see the floodwaters or the smoke or the remnants. We see the survivors only. And so when we think about the broken systems of income inequality and a lack of affordable housing and mental and behavioral health lack of access and job loss and lack of unemployment and domestic violence and all the other hundreds of reasons that can lead someone to experience homelessness, for that person and those individuals who experience that, that's as disastrous as a flood or an earthquake or a fire. But we end up having narratives of individual responsibility and deservedness. So I thought that was a really interesting starting point. And that led us to decide to, over the course of 5 years, write When We Walk By.
Kevin, you touched on a couple different things, and I know we've got a number of different questions that we'll weave through, and probably this will be touched on, but several different things that stood out to me with what you just talked about. You named individuals. You use people's names. And I don't want to dismiss that component. I want to really make sure that resonates with those that listened. People by name. The second thing that you touched on that is woven into your book is that aspect of systems that are broken. And I'm glad you brought in your co-author to bring that part to it, because when people delve into the book, they'll see the individual stories and then the systems that are broken. And then your last part about touching on unnatural disasters. You're right. There's a real key component to the community's response when a natural disaster takes place. And clearly we need to rise up. But you talked about these unnatural disasters that are woven into people's lives. So as we step into this, the insights that you've received from many of these individuals, that really informed your work, the insights of people's lives and the insights of who these people were. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you've touched hundreds of lives, and Jamie's one of them. That's part of that, but you've touched hundreds of lives. And what insights have touched you personally?
Well, I'll start with just the first insight that led me to get involved in this space. So I had an uncle who was homeless for about 30 years. He lived on the streets of Santa Cruz, and he passed away when he was 50 years old, which is about the average life expectancy of someone who's been chronically homeless, as my Uncle Mark had been. And so after he died, I started just thinking, gosh, everyone I'm walking by, that's someone's son or daughter, that's someone's brother or sister, that's some kid's beloved uncle or aunt. And in one of the first conversations I had, where I decided to spend a year getting to know my unhoused neighbors as neighbors, one of the individuals, I heard them say, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. And that little nugget of that homelessness, yeah, it's a housing problem, but the experience is not just the loss of housing. It can be the loss of social support, what I have come to call relational poverty as an overlooked form of poverty. That was something that I didn't hear many service providers, government agencies articulate. And the deeper I went into researching the issue, talking to unhoused neighbors, and just kind of trying to put things together, I realized that it's as many as 1 in 3 people who are experiencing homelessness attribute the immediate cause of their homelessness to some form of relational breakdown or brokenness. That doesn't mean the solution to homelessness is just help everyone reconnect and have a friend. Like, we have to build housing. We have to do programs like tiny homes and, good work that HomeAid does. But it was just like, wow, this issue is a lot more complex and human than the binary that the term suggests, which is, do you have housing or not? So that insight formed the basis for starting Miracle Messages.
Kevin, you were talking about a term that many that are either working in this area of homelessness or even the community at large aren't really familiar with, and that is relational poverty. And I do think, people are familiar with food poverty or housing insecurity or a variety of different things of that aspect. But I think that you've touched on very key in your book and in your other messages that relational poverty is interwoven with it. Because if you lose your housing and you don't have a safety net, which most people do, or many people do, you can figure it out. But many of the people that you've encountered, it does get back to relational poverty.
Yeah, and then maybe the just question that I have thought is helpful for illuminating, the overlooked role of both relational poverty and relational resilience on this issue of homelessness is, there's kind of this question that hovers over the conversation and discourse around homelessness, which is, why are so many people experiencing homelessness? Right? Super important question, right? I wrote a whole book trying to answer that question, right? That's an important question to talk about. Equally important question, never gets asked. With 1 out of every 2 Americans a paycheck away from not being able to pay rent, over 40% of people who say they don't know where they'd get $400 for an unexpected emergency.
Yep.
You almost have to ask another question, which is, why aren't more people experiencing homelessness? Why isn't half the country right now homeless or on the verge of homelessness? And the thesis that I have, and that, what we're finding Miracle Messages in our work, family, friends, community, faith-based groups, informal economy, social capital, like relationships. So as bad as homelessness is today, it could be a lot worse if it weren't for the resiliency of communities and social support systems. I think we need to understand that and try to support that to make sure that it's, especially as the social safety net gets further eviscerated in this country over the coming months and years, we need to do what we can to support loved ones who are barely getting by it as it is. So,
yeah, I could not agree more, whether or not it's young people or our aging population. So, Jamie, how did you first get connected with Kevin and the work of Miracle Messages, and shed a little light on your story and kind of how you're folded into this work?
Okay. In the year 2023, the students from USC, in conjunction with Miracle Messages, approached us, a group of us, and I thought at first, well, I always need more friends. And I thought this could be cool. This could be different. And I had a phone buddy, and we would contact each other at least once a week. She was a student at USC, and we got to know each other, and it brought me out of my shell. I was very closed off to the general population because of my experience homeless, and I was untrusting of individuals. And I got to know her, and it brought me to a point where I wanted to go out more often and venture out like I used to, and enjoy the atmosphere outside and the environment.
So the student at USC really bridged that gap, became your contact, and really began to reach out to you and connect with you, and allowed you to be seen, allowed you to be brought out. Kevin, is that kind of one of the core components within Miracle Messages, is teaming people up like that and becoming connected and allowing people that are previously unseen to be seen?
That's a huge part of it. I would say, if you have 100 people who are experiencing homelessness, you have 100 different stories, contexts, needs, situations, right? So Jamie eloquently kind of shared her experience of maybe distancing from people and then having a relationship like a phone buddy that we offer that allowed as a bridge to say, hey, maybe I want to re-engage. But we have stories like that. We have stories of folks who don't have anyone that they're talking to, and this is their friend. But at Miracle Messages, we offer 3 core programs. So we do family and friend reunification services, where we have folks who are experiencing homelessness can record a message, video, audio, a paper intake form, an online form, by themselves, self-referral, or it could be through a caseworker, a social worker, a volunteer, an outreach worker. Then once a message is recorded through one of these mechanisms, it goes into our network of volunteer digital detectives. And these are folks who make phone calls and write letters and do digital searches to locate loved ones, deliver messages, and help people reunite with their families. So that program has led to well over 1,100 reunifications over the last 10 years. But we also realized that for some people, family is part of the problem, not part of the solution. Bridges have been burned. Domestic violence, LGBTQ youth, represent 9% of the total population in the United States on estimates, but about 40% of the youth homeless population, right? So there's reasons why people may not want to reconnect. It'd be totally inappropriate. So how do you address relational poverty for folks where family's not part of the solution? And that's where we launched the program that Jamie was referring to, Miracle Friends, where we match volunteers all around the country, weekly phone calls and text messages, 20, 30 minutes a week as kind of a digital pen pal. And those volunteers have logged at this point, my numbers are probably a little dated, but well over 350,000 conversation minutes between phone calls, text messages, check-ins. And then the latest program really emerged from the Phone Buddy program, which was, gosh, you've asked us to be friends. We're in a relationship of Phone Buddy. We really, a lot of these pairs have become true, genuine friends. Well, it's very hard to be on equal footing as friends in a relationship if one friend doesn't know how they're going to get food on the table tonight, how they're going to get gas to go to work on Monday and put gas in their car, because 45%, 50% of people unhoused who have some kind of employment or source of income. So how do you help them? And then that's what led us to create one of the first basic income pilots for unhoused folks in the country. And that program, we've now given out well over $2 million in direct cash. So those are the programs around relational and financial support, really with a foundation undergirding all of it of narrative change and trying to change hearts and minds on this issue. We talk a lot about homelessness. We don't talk nearly enough about housed people and the role housed people have to play in this issue.
So, Kevin, you were just talking about the financial assistance program that Miracle Messages has, and that's really, I think, a key thing because so many people are just right on that cusp. And what does that extra $100, $200, $400 mean? And there is always that question when you're seeing someone who's experiencing homelessness, the person on the street corner, the person panhandling, do I give them money? Mm-hmm. It's often a question that we're asked in HomeAid's world as we're educating and talking to people about projects that we're doing. And they always dial back, do I give that person money on the street corner? And is that a helpful piece? You may or may not have a direct answer to that, but you do have a direct answer of providing financial assistance to folks. And it gets into that aspect of that's a transformational piece, a transformational component. Can you tell a couple of stories of how that actually catapulted somebody that with that little bit of extra money that you've facilitated from being either housing insecure, food insecurity to the next step in their life?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. Add a question for you. I'm super curious. What do y'all say at HomeAid when folks ask that question? You got me intrigued.
Yeah. Well, I approach it from a personal perspective. I say, one, make sure when you're interacting with somebody that's on the streets, you need to humanize them. You need to personalize eye contact, using your name, introducing yourself, using that person's name. You need to have a human connection to begin with. Then from the money standpoint, it's a personal decision. I think that we can't control what that individual does with the funds. And I've been led at times to give funding, to give money. Other times I've been hesitant. And so I think it's approaching from the perspective of really first looking at this as a person, as a human, and introducing yourself, eye contact, their name. And then you're going to get to a point where you make that decision, am I going to give funding or not? So it's a personal choice. It's not a yes or no. It's not good or bad, because and ultimately when you give that funding, you're releasing it to that person to do with as you can't control that component. You can control how you respond and how you interact with that person.
Well, I'd say I've generally seen our unhoused neighbors use the money better than I could have used it for them. And when you actually take a moment to think about that concept, it actually makes sense, right? Like, who knows better than you what you and your family needs, right? And so really what we're talking about isn't so much money and spending, it's trust. Do we trust the person to use the money well? And if we don't trust them, why don't we trust them?
Yeah.
And I think at the root, if you keep kind of going down that rabbit hole, you end up realizing that we don't trust people because we think people make bad choices and that's how they end up homeless, which is baloney. So I was skeptical, to be honest, with the basic income, not so much because of the trust piece or, the how money would be spent. I was skeptical just because it's a relatively small amount of money. Like, we started out with our first pilot, $500 a month for 6 months. How are you in the Bay Area going to make a meaningful difference in your life for $500 a month? And, to my surprise, in that initial pilot, of the 14 individuals who had received the money, 10 of whom were homeless at the time of the first payment, 2/3 of them had secured housing within 6 months. Now, not a scientific study. This was very much a pilot. It was an unusual time in the pandemic. But, folks like Elizabeth was able to use the money to become eligible for senior housing that required a minimum monthly contribution, right? And was able to then make that contribution and go from a medical respite shelter to now what she calls her forever home. Ray was able to save up enough to feel good about moving in with a friend that he had met online. And they moved in together and ended up getting married, actually. And he was able to get back to work, but he didn't want to feel like he was a burden to this individual. And so he wanted to save up enough to move in as a housemate. So, stories like that over and over again. And even if you're not just looking at housing outcomes, if you just look at how the money's spent, 1/3 of the money was spent on housing, 1/3 was spent on food security. And, the last third was a mix of childcare, paying down debt, storage, family emergencies, healthcare costs, transportation, things of that sort. And, many people actually made donations to charitable causes, including Miracle Messages. And
that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So,
HomeAid works on the built environment. We build buildings and we work with many service providers, but we encounter a lot of misperceptions that people have related to homelessness. Kevin, when you think of aspects that are clear misperceptions that people need to overcome, what are a few of the top ones that you want to make sure that if someone's listening to this podcast, what can we reframe? What can we cast a different perspective on some of the top misperceptions of people that are experiencing homelessness?
Gosh, so many. And I'm constantly bumping into my own misperceptions, right? Like I share a story in the book of the first time that I met a neighbor experiencing homelessness who was going to volunteer with our with the storytelling project that preceded Miracle Messages. And I'm meeting this individual in broad daylight through a mutual friend, approaching them at a public, busy street corner right by a grocery store. And instinctively, as I approach them, I reach my hand in my pocket and grab my keys as a weapon. Right. Yep. I didn't know if this person was safe, if they were going to lunge at me, if they were, mentally stable. I'm not proud of that, right? Like that's where I started though. And I had an uncle who was homeless, for 30 years. Like I should have started on, first base in terms of, the empathy and understanding. So, I share that not out of any kind of pride because it's embarrassing, but, I think we all have the need to hold up a mirror and look very carefully, but very honestly at how we see other people. Are we seeing them as problems to solve or as people to love? And if we see them as a problem to solve, that not only reduces their humanity, it also reduces our own. And so I find that I could, go through, substance addictions and mental health and choices and lifestyles, but, all of that really is under the umbrella category of just dehumanizing our neighbors, right? Seeing them as them rather than part of us, and presuming they're all from, the equivalent of planet homelessness.
Yep.
Right. And that's just, there's no such planet. It's our planet. It's 80% of the people who are homeless in a community were previously housed in that community. So,
and that's a really interesting perspective. My family and I moved within this last year to a new community, and our former community had people that were living on the streets, and I was able to understand the different dynamics and who was at what convenience store, and because it was becoming part of our community. In this new community, I've had to explore and see, okay, what is actually happening. And to what you were talking about, you grab your keys in your pocket because you feel unsafe and things like that. And so here in my new community, there are clearly individuals and families that are experiencing homelessness, and you walk up to the convenience store or the local Walmart and there's a car, you clearly see that someone is living in that car. And what's your first reaction? Is it your own personal safety? Am I safe? I don't know this community like I did before. And I knew individuals in my prior community because they were part of the ecosystem and they were our neighbors. I don't know that here. And there is that first tendency to become self-protective. But when we begin to shift that perspective and see them as, we don't know what their circumstances are, why that car is a person living in that car or driving up to the gas station or at the CVS. So I think we always have to take a look at that in our own perspectives first, and what paradigm needs to shift as I'm accepting or not of this individual that I'm now encountering. That's a really important piece to understand.
Mm-hmm.
As we step into these things.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the nuance that you're speaking of, Scott, because it's easy if you're sitting right now, you and I having a nice conversation, nice day out, we got our books behind us, we're sitting in front of a laptop, we're like, just be friendly and make eye contact and say hi and interact. And yeah, that's good general advice, but also like sometimes people don't feel comfortable or they don't feel safe or, they're busy. They're just going to and from work. So I think that through line that really is striking me in what you're describing is it's really just about kind of getting past the fear that these are some other. And then sometimes I'm a kind of rude or short with my house neighbors in my neighborhood, right? Like I'm not Mr. Perfect. So it's not trying to hold ourselves to some angelic, perfect standard. Like none of us are that. And in the same way that, unhoused neighbors come from all situations, personalities. I've had thousands of conversations at this point with neighbors I've met experiencing homelessness. And, I've become friends with some folks, but some people I'm like, you kind of rub me the wrong way. I don't want to interact any further. But it's like that's the messiness of being human. And so, I just appreciate taking the time to at least consider, why am I feeling this way? Is this based on a stereotype, a bias, a fear, my own prejudice? And just making sure, even if there's a person or two that we choose not to engage with or don't feel comfortable, then being even more proactive to find ways to volunteer at, a tiny home village or a soup kitchen or food meal center,
the local food bank, etc.
Yeah, just finding something to get to know our neighbors, I think, is critical. So,
yeah. Well, on that note, when we look at, you and I are personalizing it in our local neighborhoods, and we have choices every day when we go out there how we're going to respond, and sometimes you're right. Sometimes we don't always interact well with everybody. You're certainly not approaching it from a either a righteous or an angelic perspective, but it's a really important thing to self-check yourself. But as you look at the issues related to homelessness in our country as a whole, there's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of aspects, whether or not it's federal government, local decisions. There's a lot of questions about things that are going on. What's right? What's wrong? Approaches to solving the issues, and we're at a apex with many different conversations on the broader issues related to homelessness. But what are you seeing right now? What's the broader vision that you see for the future when it comes to homelessness in America? And your book talks about systems, and rightly so. There's some systemic issues that are there, but what's some of the right next steps that you feel that we should be taking right now with all that is revolving around this issue in our country?
There's no way to sugarcoat it. It's a really hard time in this space. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. We've seen, executive orders that really, encourage the worst impulses in society to further criminalize an issue that's really more of a community matter, right? Like I think of it one way as like, if you have 10 people and you have, 8 chairs, and then the music stops playing and you got to sit in a chair, there's going to be 2 people for no fault of their own who don't have chairs.
Right.
And then you remove another chair and you get rid of more public housing and you make rents even more unaffordable. Well, now you have 7 chairs. Now you have 11 people, with population growth, right? So homelessness is not a fault of individuals. It's a fault of policy choices and systems and a societal choice. And yet the move that I'm seeing is to treat it as if the person did something wrong by not having stable housing. And that's not, that's absolutely a critique of the current, administration, federal government, but it's also an indictment on a lot of state and local governments that tend to be left-leaning. Right? This is not a left or right issue. This to me is a right or wrong issue. Right. Yeah. And it's just wrong to treat people as problems, not as people. So I'm pretty pessimistic over the coming years. And that's not even getting into the, decimation of the social safety net and, Medicaid stuff and SNAP and housing vouchers and just the safety net. The country seems to be doing everything it can to make sure that the lives of billionaires are smoother and that poor people are, penalized for being poor. So that's not my optimistic normal self. I hate to say it. I would say I believe in people. I know we both are connected to the Stand Together network. Like At a core, I think most people are really good. They just may not have the experience of interacting and knowing by name, as you said at the beginning of this program, a neighbor who's unhoused. So I actually have confidence that, if I had a magic wand, could wave it, the wand is going to be waved to like give everyone housing or give everyone enough money to afford housing, right? And build the supply. So that's the obvious wand to wave. If I had a second wand and I couldn't wave that first one, it would be that every single person in this country get to know as a friend or as a close neighbor a person who's experiencing homelessness.
Yep.
Because I found that when you actually get to know someone by name, it's not just like the humanity piece. I know we've kind of emphasized that on this program. It's actually the issue, the challenges and the headwinds of what that person is facing and why they're currently on the streets or in a shelter or, unhoused. It actually opens up and you can actually start saying, well, that actually, if we dealt with that issue and I supported this and you had a little bit more money or you got reconnected and there was some reconciliation with your family, or we got you your ID card because you lost it. Oh, you had to choose between paying rent and paying medical bills because you have a chronic illness that's debilitating, right? Oh, you can't afford dog food, and that's why being in a shelter environment isn't feasible because you don't have a place for your pet, and that's your loved one, right? You're not going to let them go. So actually, when you get close enough, you can say, well, here, let's work together to resolve this. This is not, this is difficult, but it's not impossible to solve. So I think we need to get past both the criminalization of homelessness and, quite frankly, this over technocracy, over everything's top down. Everything feels like it has to be one size fits all. And that's just not the case with homelessness, short of just building a level of housing supply and affordability that, I don't see any community doing anytime soon. So,
yeah. And you touched on clearly a lot of issues and food for thought for both myself, you, and ultimately our listeners, because where does the hope lie?
Yeah.
And because there's certainly things that are out of our control. And ultimately, when we get down to it, it gets back to the individuals that we can touch. And when I look at the people in my community or the people that have been involved with HomeAid, there's some challenges in the home building industry. There's challenges, but when we get back to it, what is it? How do we bring hope? How do we bring light in the work that you and I are doing? And it gets back to individualizing it and bringing it back. There was a statement that was made by somebody else that I've gotten to know, that it's the 3 feet around you. And there's certain systems and certain bigger pictures and certain things that we can't change something beyond our control, but we can impact the 3 feet around us.
Wow.
And that's where I think hope lies. When I walk out of my house, even my house neighbors, what's going on in their lives? Am I interacting with them? Our family, the person that I see down, am I kind to the individual that's helping me check out at the grocery store? Or even the person that points me to the self-checkout? Am I being kind? Am I being interactive in a way that is supportive, regardless of where they're at? And it sets a tone with some of these bigger issues for our community and some of the systems. Jamie, as you look at some of these things, I think as we're beginning to wrap up some of our conversation, what gives you hope? There's a lot of things in our world that are challenging. What gives you hope?
The will to persevere and the will to live. That there's a brighter future ahead. And in speaking of the money gift, that put me back to being human again in a way that I was able to get a life insurance policy and secure some debts. And it opened the door for the opportunity for me to be gainfully employed again. The opportunities are limitless as far as self worth and self growth. Moving forward, forging ahead, discussing what effects that Miracle Messages has had, Miracle Friends has had in my life. It's been all encompassing. Just me leaving the house and feeling okay and safe from harm by myself, going to the grocery store, doing regular tasks, venturing out to a nightclub and listening to a band play is my next adventure. Having the fear of living life outside of the small area that I can control, which is my home, having those fears subside is incredible. It just really has changed my life. Kevin and the team have changed my life tremendously.
So, Kevin, I hope that gives you hope too, and encouragement by hearing what that's meant to Jamie and just her changes in her life.
Yeah, so profound, Jamie. Gosh, you get me choked up almost here, Jamie. You're so eloquent.
No.
So glad.
Only real men.
It's good to have your voice. That's right. That's true. It's the quote of the conversation so far. That was so well said.
Well, as we wrap up our time together, I know that there's personal things that each of us, and I want to acknowledge both of you individually. Kevin, you use the initial F in your name very importantly, and I don't want to discount that because my middle initial in my name is C. It's after my grandfather, Charlie, who immigrated from Sweden. And I'm grateful that I should probably, like you, begin to use C in remembrance of him. But tell us why you use F in your name.
Oh, I'd be delighted to. Thanks for asking. So, yeah, my full name is Kevin Farrington Adler. And the Farrington is actually my mom's maiden name. She unfortunately, she passed away when she was 59. I was 23 years old at the time. So it's been a few years now. She had breast cancer and fought very courageously to the end. But, the thing about her was she was both the strongest person I ever met and the kindest person I ever met. She had a younger sister who was developmentally disabled, and she was always her protector. Growing up, we always had Auntie Diane over for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and she was had a few behavioral issues at times, and had lived in a special needs home, but she always made a point to make sure that Diane felt fully included as the beloved member of the family that she was. And my mom, she worked at older adult school exercise homes for underserved senior citizens, low-income senior citizens, many of whom had been, left forgotten or just unable to be supported by family. And so for me, I talk about my Uncle Mark a lot, but also my mom, just seeing her example of treating people with kindness. She had a famous phrase that we joked about a lot, especially while she was alive, gave her a really hard time for, but it's proven to be quite prescient. And that phrase is, people are people.
Yeah.
So we get frustrated with someone would do something very upsetting and you just want to write them off or discount them. And she'd say, look, people are people. You got to find some levity and maybe even a little gratitude that that's not how you show up. And, you just kind of accept the fact that they're living the life that they are able to live, in their circumstances. So I do the Kevin F. Adler as a small hat tip for the person who, shaped me the most in my life, who I, think of every day. So,
yeah, that's beautiful. Well, as Kevin and Jamie, thank you for both sharing kind of from your heart and with courage, because this is not an easy topic, and it's to be vulnerable, to be open. I really appreciated both of you in our conversation today, and it brings it back to what we're dealing with people that that are unhoused or experiencing homelessness. It's not just a housing issue. It's bottom line, it's a human issue. To our listeners, as we wrap this up, if you want to learn more about either the book When We Walk By or support the work of Miracle Messages, we're going to have it in our show notes. You can find them through all social forms of social media. And until our next time, definitely keep seeing, not just walking by. I'm Scott Larson, and this has been Unsheltered Conversations.